Welcome back to the Pichy and Pals cast. My sister no longer has cancer. I think I mentioned that on the show, so that's pretty sweet. It turns out it wasn't cancer at all. As always, I am joined by my friend Matt, who hates anime, and I, of course, am your host Pichy, who hates Christmas. How are you going today, Matt?
I'm doing all right. I think we watched two very the movies that alternate between being boring and very concerning at the same time. But then we ended it off with something a bit more fun.
Cool. I think I'll continue asking you questions to start this one off on. What's your thoughts on Christmas?
It's like the hard questions because...
Oh, you know, whenever I ask you a question at the start, it's always something like this.
It's a hard question just because we're talking about something that's just so naturalized in us.
Like an ice cream mat.
Naturalized.
Yes,
yeah. I think as well, because it is so naturalized, like you don't even think about like what you think about these events. It's just something that happens, and it's just something that is just so ingrained in how you view the world that I'm not sure if I have too many thoughts beyond what a regular person would.
So, okay then, let's rephrase this as, what is Christmas to you?
Christmas is a time when families get to spend time with each other that otherwise don't live with each other. It's a time for holidays. It's a time for hopefully getting some time off work, if that's what you do. It's a time for lots of food, and it's a time for presents if you have the economic, if you have the money to do so. That's what Christmas is to me.
Alrighty. So, Christmas for me as a Christian is a time of immense frustration. As I was intending this week to do a very in-depth and thorough discussion of the history of Christmas as a concept and a holiday, and the various transformations and permutations it's had over the last couple of thousand years. But this week has been very messy and busy. I'm now going to Melbourne in like 8 hours' time, and a bunch of things like that are happening, so I did not get the prep work I wanted to do. So, very, very broad strokes here. So, a lot of cultures celebrated solstices because it's and equinoxes because they're very notable shifts in when weather conditions are changing. And they seem to be convenient times to then have some sort of celebration because, hey, there's a time that we're aware of. Around the transformation from the BC or before Common Era to the current era or Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, there's a census in Judea around the time of Augustus Caesar that was set up by the governor, one of the governors who succeeded King Herod. This is something which comes up as a point of consternation when it comes to the traditional Christian narrative of Christmas, because the Gospel of Luke insists that the census of Judea was A, empire-wide, and B, in the time of Herod. When it wasn't, it was 10 years after his death. But it provides a convenient part of a narrative of Jesus' birth fulfilling certain prophecies to indicate that he is the Messiah or the Messiah, and is an important part of Christian traditions of contextualizing Jesus as a prophesied Messiah and recontextualizing the prophecies of a great military leader to instead be a great spiritual leader. So, this guy called Jesus walks around, says some cool stuff. I've talked before about the divinity of God, and that's not something I feel like having a debate about at this time of night, so that can come up another time. But this guy dies. I would say he then respawned, but that's neither here nor there. Over the following centuries, as Christianity becomes increasingly mainstream, it ultimately becomes completely mainstream, and Constantine legalizes it and declares it the national religion of the Holy Roman Empire. A bunch of things like that happen, and what occurs over the following centuries is this recontextualization of pagan traditions into Christian ones, because, hey, people are celebrating a thing. If we want them to be more accepting of our ideas, we'll just basically put a different skin on your holiday. It's not a spring fertility ritual, it's now the new life that you have in Christ. It's not celebrating the middle of winter and the transformation there. It is now the dark times are coming over because Christ has been born. Things like that start to be employed. And from there, of course, Christianity rises, and then in the wake of things like the Pact of Westphalia and the 30 Years' War and the Enlightenment period, in particular the later stages of the Enlightenment, where there's a much greater scrutiny of Christianity, this leads to certain Christian holidays like Christmas declining in popularity. What changes things there is there's this obnoxious beta-cuck social justice warrior writer in England called Chuck Dix, and he actually really likes Christmas, and so he decides to write a book about this rich arsehole who won't share his wealth, but it is through coming to a strange spiritual experience related to Christmas that he learns there is a certain value to wealth redistribution. This book is, of course, A Christmas Carol, a Christmas ghost story, and this drastically changed the way that the Anglosphere was interacting with Christmas. This book was one of the best-selling Charles Dickens books of all time, and really, really changed things. People went, wow, Christmas is this cool, hip thing that we want to get into now. And, of course, I mean, Christmas was already using all sorts of weird pagan traditions. I mean, frickin' mistletoe is straight up just a pagan fertility rite right there. But so this starts to bring in this thing of, hey, we gotta give gifts to celebrate the birth of Christ becomes popular at a time when there's all sorts of interesting ideas. I've mentioned before, when we talked a bit about witches, some of the sort of occult ideas popping up around this era. And then a pastor writes a story called "Twas the Night Before Christmas" to entertain his children, and this essentially recontextualizes various traditions that were floating around Europe of saints that would go around giving gifts to children. And so this then gives a further modern spin on it. The Coca-Cola company really, really, really likes this depiction of St. Nicholas or Santa Claus. And so, seeing that there was various imagery floating around, decided to reconsolidate it as part of their Christmas branding, to firmly associate that Coca-Cola is a beverage that you have in the Christmas time, even though it's a cold beverage and it's winter in America. And things like the letters to Santa, as a cultural concept, stem from Coca-Cola advertising campaigns. And then from there, we get the invention of the film camera and animation and mass distribution of media, which then results in a lot of what we understand about Christmas essentially being a construction of the last century or so, particularly in the Anglosphere. So for me, Christmas is a point of frustration because, like, I understand that there is this context of reappropriating various other traditions in order to construct a Christian one, but there's a certain disingenuity that pops up in a lot of fundamentalist Christian circles in particular, which act like Christmas has been this immutable tradition for the last 2 millennium. And even though Christianity has been very much a part of First World and developed nations' hegemony over the last century, there is this burning desire to construct a victim complex and to insist that there's some mythical war on Christmas being perpetrated by a they, without that ever being defined, even when companies have consistently seen the financial value in propagating Christmas imagery and messages in order to take money from you, which has nothing to do with love, forgiveness, looking after the poor and the sick, and the downtrodden and those in prison. But you just gotta buy shit. And so there's this culture of consumerism that often continues to strike Christian circles. Because if you're not buying into and expressing that sort of appreciation for Christmas, then are you really saying that Jesus is the Son of God? I don't think you are. So you gotta buy more shit. And it drives me bananas. It often leads to very much like you brought up the eating lots of food. And there's a twofold complaint I have here. The first is, like, I'm not a big fan of the overconsumption of food. I have a tendency to eat too much if food is laid out in front of me, and I don't like people enabling that in me when I know it's a problem and they know it's a problem. The other thing is that, on a really anecdotal note here, my family's food traditions all suck. They're the most boring, English-inspired, have some breads, have some meats, have some salads. I don't want a roast turkey or a roast ham. My comfort foods are like dumplings, fried rice, curries, and pasta. Could we do some of them? Those are nice. Those scale really easily, so you lead to a more cost-effective, more enjoyable meal. Do some of that, please. So I've got this continual frustration theologically in terms of my politics when it comes to consumerism, and also just these logistics of having to hang around with a bunch of people who aren't particularly strong parts of my life, and also the food is not something I can take refuge in as much. So everything's very annoying for me, and there you go.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff. I think it's particularly a shame that this idea that a certain number of fundamentalist Christians feel the need to try and present Christmas as like a mutable thing that's been around for so long, when there is a much more wholesome story to be told here of a kind of event that people of many cultures and religions and nations and all the way around the world throughout history have found ways to celebrate, whether that was a winter solstice, whether that was a pagan ritual, whether it's what Christmas is now. You could probably create a narrative where a much more wholesome and much more integrative narrative of whatever you believe and wherever you are from, we can find a reason to celebrate the core values that you would consider most humans to have. the love that we can share with each other and all those kind of things. So it's a shame that instead we have at times now a Christmas that is either very, very consumerist or is wound up in a lot of religious fundamentalism. Yeah.
And so it is from constructing holistic concepts that we come to the films that I decided to do as a first Christmas bout. This wasn't what I was originally going to do with The Nightmare Before Christmas. I was going to do a film called Kirk Cameron's Saving Christmas and really look about certain complaints I have with the narrative of The Nightmare Before Christmas and its themes. But I was talked down out of this by a friend, and so we instead did a bunch of Rankin Bass films in order to establish, firstly, to a certain degree, the history of stop motion in relation to Christmas media in America, as well as looking at American constructions of Christmas and the way that they've influenced each other and the weird things that they crib from and have done so over the last, 4 decades. So I guess a very quick little rundown about Rankin and Bass. This is going to be extremely quick. Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass were 2 businessmen with some artistic interests who formed a group called Videocraft with the interest of producing various content. In particular, they got a TV deal to make some TV holiday specials. And they came up with the idea of doing stop motion for these because they saw the work of a Japanese animator called Tadahito Mochinaga, who they then gave a bunch of money to and basically outsourced all the work to produce their Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer adaptation to him and his crew. And so his studio became one called Topcraft, and it led to this interesting relationship there, where a lot of iconic American Christmas media throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s was produced by Topcraft or a couple of other Japanese studios. In particular, there's a Frosty the Snowman short from 1969, I think, which is 2D animation, which was also by a Japanese studio, and there's also one that frequently got repeats in the Christmas slots on American free-to-air TV. So, even when you're watching a night of American stop motion, you are actually still watching anime, Matt.
I think that's a really neat story. I think that's one of those neat little facts that you can find out that just makes the world that little bit more connected. You know, this idea that even this most American of movies has a little bit of international influence in it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's really interesting as the Rankin Bass films go on. Because as you saw with the second one we watched Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer from 1964 or 2? Let me check. I mean, yeah, it's early 60s, but yeah, it's 64. They were both, yeah, it was 64 and The Year Without Santa Claus was 74. So I chose ones exactly 10 years apart. And you can really see that, everyone has improved at their craft over that decade. But
Yeah, you lost it.
I did lose it.
Oh no. That's okay. for a date?
I'm trying to remember what my train of thought here was. Oh yeah, so like I said, this week was a bit of a rush for me, but I will put in the uploaders' comments for this week more than just one lame description of "in this week, lame joke happened." I will put a couple of links to a piece by Michael Toole and a piece by Daryl Surratt on the history of the Japanese animators who wound up being major contributors to American Christmas media. So, the other thing I was going to say is that as we went over these, you can see that these films are trying to construct Christmas stories, but there's only so many that you can do. Which is why you see A Christmas Carol has been adapted to film roughly 4,398 times. That may even be the actual number. Because there's so few actual Christmas stories. Your options are do the Christian myths, do A Christmas Carol, do Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, I guess. Or you have to, or you can to a certain extent do The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or you got to actually dig into, say, like winter solstice myths. And so you're gonna wind up doing, so Rankin and Bass, their company wound up working with Topcraft for like 30-ish years on making these stop motion shorts. Eventually they switched to CG because it's cheaper. But it meant that they had to keep coming up with stories related to Christmas. And based on some essentially throwaway gags that the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer one does, like, oh, Santa Claus lives in the first castle on the left in the North Pole, which was also the only castle. Like, you can see that as some sort of weird joke to say, hey, look, it's absurd. We're trying to extrapolate on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and that's awkward. But they're then kind of stuck with this, so they have to start extrapolating on this lore that doesn't particularly make sense, and so they just start cribbing from everywhere. The Rankin Bass film that I saw the most as a child was Rudolph's Shiny New Year, which is about... It turns out that each year has an animistic spirit that represents it, who starts off as a baby on January 1st, and over the course of the year matures into an adult, then becomes an old man, and dies on December 31st. The whole way through, he is in fact Father Time, who is in this perpetual cycle of death and rebirth. But the problem is that the year that film is occurring in, the baby New Year has very big ears, which he is embarrassed about. And so he decides to run away. So Rudolph, with his nose so bright, has to take a boat and sail through the oceans of the ages to find which time island the baby New Year is on. And in here, he winds up encountering places like 10,000 BC, I think some point in American colonial history, because of course it does. And I think the year is like 1012 or 1020, which is the year that every fairy tale happened. Insane lore things like that pop up, and as well as there's frequently these animistic spirits that pop up because they don't want to... They're trying to avoid using explicitly Christian imagery and thus being accused of blasphemy. So you wind up cribbing from pagan ideas and Shinto ideas and just any animistic religion they can find, just so they've got some sort of mythology they can construct, while at the same time characters often then also believe in the Christian God. And it's fascinating to me.
It is fascinating. It shows, I think, like, in all these ideas they came up with, they didn't think to try and instead maybe go for more personal stories, which I would think could be the better way to do it. Instead of trying to expand on some kind of insane mythology that doesn't make any sense, maybe instead tell stories about, I don't know, someone who's struggling with Christmas, or someone who has an interesting Christmas story to tell, or has a different, like, viewpoint on Christmas. But no, instead it's just, like, insanity with, like, the Miser Brothers and those fairy tales you're talking about. Like, that, it's so insane.
I mean, I'm actually honestly happy to have that brand of insanity, because you watch pretty much every other Christmas movie. As I've mentioned before, my family used to have connections to a video shop. And this meant that for years, I was very excited about Christmas to laugh at Christmas dog movies. Because every year there would be some movie with a dog on the cover where children or grumpy adults would learn the true meaning of Christmas. And some of these are real whack. Like, I think it's Santa Paws 2 Santa Pups, I think is the one where there is a Christmas icicle, which is inside the center of the North Pole and contains the entire essence of Christmas spirit, but it's melting because some puppies have gone missing. And if it completely melts, then there will be no more Christmas. This is the sequel to, of course, The Search for Santa Paws, where Santa's favorite beloved dog has gone missing, but the dog winds up helping an orphaned white girl and a black boy learn the true meaning of Christmas.
Is this an example of often when you have, say, like a franchise or like a story kind of like universe of some kind, and eventually if you write too many stories about the same genre or the same universe, eventually it's eventually gonna get more and more farcical. You're gonna run out of ideas.
Are you saying that Christmas is the season 8 of any serial TV show?
Well, I'm just wondering, like, is this an example of what happens if that actually can't happen, or is in
Christmas is the embodiment of the Great Gazoo? That's the true meaning of Christmas? Watch out, dum-dum.
Well, so because usually with something that doesn't have some kind of massive cultural underpinning that kind of holds it in place no matter what, like say like a TV show or like some kind of story universe, like eventually it just won't sell anymore and it goes away if it gets too insane, gets too dumb. But with Christmas, like it doesn't matter how dumb you get, it doesn't matter how horrible the movies that come out for it or any kind of media that comes out for it, it's always going to at least sell a little bit, and it's always going to be next year someone's going to try something.
Yeah, there has been, through traditions like these stemming up, there has been this reinforcement of this certain tradition where the symbols of Christmas have been granted this inherent value, and thus people will acquire things which have the Christmas image to them and the feel. And I think that will... should we just get straight into actually detailing the plots of the Rankin Bass things we saw?
Sure.
All right, tell us the plots.
Okay. So for the first movie, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, is essentially just a retelling of the song. While it was only 50 minutes, it was a very dragging 50 minutes of movie. So essentially, it's just a long drawn-out retelling of the.
So how does it drag things out? Like, how do you expand on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows? How does it extrapolate those lines?
Well, it kind of one of the things that I found is it stretched out the way Rudolph is ostracized from society. In that
I haven't gotten to those lines yet.
Oh.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows. How does it convey the content of those two lines in film form?
Well, I mean, it establishes like a storyline or a narrative where Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, his red nose is like a reason why Christmas is apparently going to be cancelled because of a horrible, horrible storm, and the fact that...
Oh, well, we're jumping too late here. Okay, let me reframe this. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows. We are introduced to Rudolph through his birth to Comet and Comet's wife. And Comet goes, "What the fuck? My son has this shitty-ass nose. He's a total geek. This guy will never be anything. We better hide the shame of our failed, inherently inferior child." Followed immediately by Santa Claus walking in and saying, "Dear God, what a piece of shit child you have. That piece of shit will never amount to anything. You better cover the shit out of that nose."
It was such an hilarious moment where, like, I just couldn't quite believe what I was hearing, because I always got I understand that as part of the song they talk about Rudolph being made fun of first, but I always thought that was just like what his peers were like he looked different, and so, you know, it was very easy to be picked on. But this is like a more
eugenesis.
Yeah. This is like systemic racism in terms of like something incredibly dumb. And I mean, like, if you could kind of make an interesting story about that, where you make your bigotry and prejudice about something that is so ludicrous to point out the ridiculousness of racism and all that in general. I don't think that's what's happening here, but it's just like, it's crazy to think that the adult reindeers, so Rudolph's like mother and father, are essentially racist against their own son. And I think especially Santa Claus, this idea of this like paternal, lovely figure that is all about spreading happiness and cheer and jolliness, is so easily like he sees something that's slightly different about his reindeers and about this one reindeer, and he immediately just becomes the most racist, awful man.
Oh yeah, I think the words that I used to describe Santa Claus in this film was the white meat patriarch, because that's what he is. He is that guy in American media. The father who will beat his son if he gets the slightest hint that they're remotely interested in anything feminine. He doesn't like being badgered by his wife about what he should and shouldn't be eating. Anytime there's any sort of cultural event on, he's there extremely bored the whole time. He grumps like nobody else in this first one. He is such a prick.
I don't understand why he's like this. Like, I've never seen a depiction of Santa Claus like this. Certainly not in a movie that is supposed to be about getting across the core ideals of Christmas. Like, I could imagine in like a later Christmas movie where they're trying to, like, I don't know, switch things up a little bit, have a different alternate interpretation. I could probably see like a more grumpy Santa Claus, just like, oh, this is interesting. There's another take on Christmas. But this is like one of the original Christmas movies, right? So it's very strange to me to see Santa Claus in this kind of
Well, I mean, there have been Christmas films for decades before this, but yes, as far as children's-oriented things for a annual franchise, it is an incredibly bizarre take on Santa, and one that's really telling to a lot of the norms of 1964 white America.
Yeah, I found that was one of the main things about this movie as well, where it was trying to, in some ways, it was trying to conflate two things with Christmas. One, the idea of consumerism and the general how capitalist society works, and trying to integrate that into how Christmas and how the North Pole works and its operations. And the second one is what we're talking about now, is the way apparently the North Pole and how Santa's like little world here in the North Pole works is very much just like how you'd expect like 1960s America to work.
White America in particular, like the people who say that they're not racist, but, and then they start citing the Rockefeller-funded eugenic studies that are bullshit.
Yeah, it's a very concerning film. I think like it's not a horror movie, but was one where I was just continually like cringing away from it. Just the idea of seeing these like very capitalist ideals, these very like white America ideals, which are like, and even like actual straight up racism in terms of Rudolph's red nose, and the idea of seeing them conflated with the idea of such, I'm struggling to find a better word than divine, but in some ways Christmas it's the way its symbols are shown to us, and the way its values, like they're so core to us. So the idea of seeing these things like together.
Yeah, Christmas media tends to really deify the concept of family in particular. Yeah, so do I go to the next lines of the song, or do I touch on a bit on the workshop and things? No, we'll just go through the song. Right, all of the other reindeer used to laugh and call him names. They never let poor Rudolph join in any reindeer games. This is perhaps the straightest part of the adaptation, where it's just Rudolph is quite popular and successful and exceedingly competent in the reindeer games, which are explicitly called the reindeer games. They're even overseen by the coach. And then the cover over his nose is knocked off, and then they all immediately reject him. Santa even lamenting that this talented youth is now inherently unworthy of being a part of the sleigh team.
It's just so eerily close to him saying something like it was him saying something like, wow, it's a real shame that he's a black kid, because he really hits that ball super well.
This guy's really good with the ball, but he took a knee. Then one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, now here's the thing, because when there's one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, Rudolph, with your nose so bright, won't you guide my sleigh tonight, and then how the reindeer loved him. That is all exactly what it sounds like. There's about 30 minutes between these stanzas, though. So from they used to laugh and call him names, we then get many interesting subplots, like the elf who is interested in dentistry rather than the manufacturing of toys. We have a snowpector, or is it what is it? Frostpector. It's a frostpector who's looking for gold in the Arctic. And I'm not sure if this is an intentional joke about the fact that there's no landmass underneath the North Pole, or if this is actually just them wanting to put the most American guy in possible. So here you have this redneck trying to find gold. They then have encounters with the abominable snow monster, which results in the elf who's run away from home, Rudolph who's run away from home, and the frostpector floating on an ice block, which takes them to the Island of Misfits, which I believe was in an episode of South Park once. And it's a sad day when I bring up South Park on this show. And there they meet that there's all these abandoned toys that were incorrectly manufactured, and they all go to this island ruled by a Manticore King? It's never directly addressed that, dude, there's this Manticore King on this little ice island. But Rudolph then immediately leaves, and then runs away. He decides to face the abominable snowman, gets his ass kicked, and so then it is up to the frostpector and the elf to brutalize and give the abominable snow monster, who hasn't really done much of anything, they give him a concussion, remove all his teeth surgically, then push him to his death down a cliff, which doesn't kill him, but we can assume from all these concussions that he is now in a much more amiable state where they can just redirect him while he's still dazed. And so they employ him as possibly unpaid labor assembling Christmas trees.
This is when the movie gets at its most insane, and there's like so many things to talk about. I think
the Frostpector song.
Yeah, that's what I was wanting to go with, because all right, so basically, as Adam said, this Frostpector comes up while Rudolph and the elf, the one who wants to become a dentist, is trying to. They're just kind of like alone together, right? They've both been ostracized by the North Pole because of their differences. Rudolph with his red nose, and the elf wanting to do dentistry.
For experiencing alienation of labor.
Yes, and so they just bump into him, and he's looking for gold. And then they, as you do in these musicals, they sing a song about him. And I love how it starts out as there's a narrator who's a snowman. How he at first seems to suggest that the Frostpector's love of gold and silver are like greedy, and that it seems
he's a fool driven by avarice.
Yeah, it seems like so it was so obvious to me at the time that I thought, okay, this is what they're going to do. They're going to be like, oh, look how greedy this person is, and he doesn't understand that the true magic of the North Pole and where Santa's North Pole is the magic of love and friendship and making good things for kids, not things like gold and silver. And then he starts singing a song about it, and then later on in the song, they just go, how wonderful gold and silver is.
You see, materialism is bad, but if you reforge the materialism to be the tinsel of your Christmas tree, then it is integrated into a German symbol of gift giving, and therefore it is okay to buy more tinsel.
This is what I mean about like wrapping up the more spiritual or community-driven kind of core values of what you would consider Christmas to be into like the more consumerist ones, where even something as basic as greed is bad and you should think about better things than this is like twisted and corrupted into, yeah, you should probably get gold and silver and you should put it on your tree. That's what Christmas is.
Hell yeah.
I would also love to talk about the Abominable Snowman just in terms of just like how
Abominable snow monster.
Oh, okay. Snow monster.
Get with the law. I'm sure there's a wiki which will correct you.
It's really important to get this law right. Just like the way they so viciously take out his teeth, and then once his teeth are out, they force him over a cliff, even though he's clearly no threat to them anymore. And I think what's really interesting about it is that the one who actually throws him off the cliff is the prospector, and his act is considered as heroic because he goes over the cliff with the snow monster, even though there was no reason to do it. The snow monster was not giving any signs of threat. He was like backing away, and then the prospector says like, "No, I'm gonna kill this abominable snow monster." And Adam has found the wiki page.
The abominable snow monster of the north, called Bumble for short, is the sole antagonist who roars loudly and later turns good in the 1964 Rankin Bass television special.
Later turns good.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. He is a gigantic white-furred yeti with long pointed fangs along with a hairless blue face, lips, hands, and feet. Bumble, a corruption of the term abominable snowman, is so named by Yukon Cornelius. That's the prospector. This goes for much longer. This is a classic fan wiki page where it's just the details of the plot without any sort of note about themes or relation to other media. You know that thing where it's like, hey, I want to know the issues X character appeared in comics, and instead you just get the entire backstory.
There's probably a whole podcast that could be done on the pros and cons of wiki culture, especially with TV shows. But like,
like a weekly podcast that's about just reviewing a wiki each week. That's money. Don't steal that, please. I might have to cut this bit out just so no one steals my excellent idea.
Well, we have been talking a lot about consumerism and capitalism. I guess copyright is something else that's in relation to
this is Australia, so I've mentioned that I have this idea, so I already own the copyright.
But yeah, I just can't believe that they frame the Cornelius's action of forcing this defenseless creature over the cliff just because he also goes over as this like heroic act of self-sacrifice, and it just doesn't ring true at all because, as I say, the snow monster was not a threat anymore.
No, he's a hero. He's like George Bush Sr. Great men of history, Matt.
No, I'm not saying anything to this. I'm sandbagging this as the term.
Yes.
So yeah, that was just something that I found really interesting. The idea that, you know, they even the main villain is kind of done pretty as a raw deal in this movie.
And yeah, that just really it really accentuates how a lot of what I find distasteful about American hegemony is present in this film. And then from there we went to The Year Without Santa Claus. Can you detail the plot of this one for me?
That one's a bit tougher just because you can definitely, as you said before, this was 10 years after the original.
And it's the Monkey Island 2 of Rankin Bass shorts? Like, this thing ambles and shambles in many directions.
Some things, some stories have a lot of filler in it, but this is a story that is almost all filler because even the main plot doesn't really have any real relevance or much of interest in it. I think basically the story, let's try to remember. Santa Claus has a cold and he feels like no one cares about Christmas anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So he decides that he's going to take a year off,
even
though he only has 1 day of work. Apparently that is too much for him. And so the rest of the North Pole, particularly his wife and a few elves, try to show him that there is still Christmas spirit in the world. There's still a need for him to go around and bring Christmas cheer to us all. And there's just like a bunch of like adventures as they go across the world and eventually find themselves in an American town in the South.
By adventures, you mean they go to Southtown, USA. This is... Okay, so this film's set in 1974, which I think means it's 2 years off of when Geese Howard moves into Southtown, where he becomes the chief of police, resulting in the town having one of the most corrupt police forces in the United States. he is thwarted by Ryo Sakazuki and his good friend Robert, and together they beat up Geese, which results in the territory returning to the possession of Mr. Big for about 4 more years. However, Geese would return to the town and lead a much more powerful mafia crime syndicate throughout the 80s, where he is ultimately thrown off of his own skyscraper by Terry Bogard, not once, but 3 times, ultimately in the final time destroying Geese Howard's Chinese immortality scrolls. However, then being racked by guilt of having just murdered a man, no matter how heinous he is, Terry Bogard then goes on to adopt his son, Rock Howard, who then goes around beating up some thugs about 15 years later in Mark of the Wolves. You now know a bunch of Fatal Fury in the Art of Fighting by SNK continuity.
No, he's lying. That's real history. That's exactly how the history of Southtown, USA worked out.
That's right. It only got fictionalized in Tekken 7.
To be fair, I think a fighting game plot would be more interesting than this movie.
Well, I mean, then there's action. Actually, like, Art of Fighting 1 and 2 have fairly good fighting game plots in the way that they're actually framed as, oh no, person being kidnapped by crooks, you gotta go around town, finding leads, beating them up to get the information out of them, and then driving to the next spot. It's quite well handled. And at the end you find out, don't do it, that man is our... To be continued.
No, for a fighting game, that sounds about fine. Unfortunately, The Year Without Santa Claus does not have such an interesting story.
So the elves go to Southtown while riding on Vixen, a reindeer. They ask some random people on the street, hey, do you believe in Santa Claus? And they go, no. Then they find a bunch of kids who go, no. Besides, the newspaper's already said that he announced that he's cancelling something. Put a pin in that. However, since they thought that people didn't believe that reindeer exist, they put some socks over Vixen's horns, which results in her being taken by the dog pound. But in order to get Vixen out of the dog pound, the elves need to go to the mayor. When they go to the mayor, you're liking this fetch quest setup right here. The mayor says, if you can make it snow, then I'll let Vixen go. So then the elves wander around working out what to do. Meanwhile, Santa Claus has gotten out of bed to get the elves back because what the hell are they doing? So he comes back, he then just pays the bail to get Vixen out of the dog pound, which resolves that subplot instantly. But then he leaves the scene again to take Vixen home to get healed, but then Mrs. Claus, and we needed to put a pin in Mrs. Claus's role in this film earlier, she then appears and takes the elves to the Snow Miser and the Heat Miser, who were introduced early on as just hooligans, elemental hooligans that shoot lasers at flying reindeer. But now they can be negotiated with to determine if we can have some snow in Southtown on Christmas Day. That will make people believe in Santa Claus. Although, apparently adults believe in Santa Claus, and the true part of maturity is comprehending that Santa Claus isn't real, but is worth believing in. Also, Santa Claus is proven to be real in this film. And has regular contact with the press, so... Again, we're putting a pin in that. So, after failed negotiations with both the Snow Miser and the Heat Miser, who both have the same absolutely fantastic song, the Mrs. Claus then just goes to the top. She just goes to Mother Nature, who is their mother, who shoots a bunch of lightning at them both and tells them to just do what Mrs. Claus says. And then everything is resolved. Santa Claus gets 1 day of spring weather a year, so he gets to have a holiday day. He gets one official day off in the 365-day calendar, because this is what happens when you are having to, as independent contractors, directly negotiate with business owners and the bourgeois instead of forming a union in order to get actual workers' rights and working with political process.
This is what we want from a Christmas movie. Negotiations between workers and businessmen and negotiations over land. That's what we want.
This is the problem with every WWE movie, like the Christmas ones, where it's like, Mike Mizanin is an elf? No. The problem is, They're not just movies of people trying to negotiate their contracts with Vincent Kennedy McMahon.
The true miracle of Christmas that they finally get to become employees instead of private contractors.
No, like the uplifting Christmas movie that you watch every year is Brock Lesnar's contract renegotiation, the movie, where he walks in and says, "Vince, you're giving me $5 million a year," and Vince says, "No," and then Brock says, "Well, okay, I'm going to UFC unless you give me $8 million." Then Vince says, "Well, okay then." Okay, which pin do we unpin first?
I think it has to be the just do it chronologically. So I guess Mrs. Claus should be. Yeah.
Tell us about Mrs. Claus's role early on.
Her role is that she thinks that Santa Claus is being dumb by thinking that there's no Christmas spirit left. She wants to try to motivate him to go and do Christmas again. When that doesn't work, she decides very, very quickly that if he's not going to do it, that she will dress up as Santa. At first, I thought she was just going to do it as herself, but no, she wanted to disguise herself as Santa Claus and just do his job and make sure no one realizes that it's her. And then she sings a very long song about the fact that anyone can be Santa Claus.
That's right.
Anyone can be Santa Claus. Anyone can do the job. She can do it. Everything's going to be fine. And then as soon as the song is over, she sees two of the elves come up to her.
Jingle and Jangle.
Yes.
Not to be confused with iconic wrestlers, the Ding Dongs, named Ding and Dong. Have I ever shown you the Ding Dongs?
No, you have not.
Oh, I need to dig up them, just for the Jim Ross commentary, because it's right before Jim Ross leaves WCW. So, it's Jim Ross in, 93, sitting at a desk saying, "You know, I was a collegiate commentator. I've seen the finest athletes our country has to offer, and I'm here watching the Ding Dongs."
Probably much more interesting than this movie. But yeah, she sees these two elves, and they immediately recognize her because they see her face, and so
she
they're
has no beard on yet.
Yeah, so of course they're like, "Oh, hey, Mrs. Claus." And they actually do take a few seconds because she's wearing his Santa Claus's outfit. They're like, "Oh, hello," and then they take a few seconds. Like, "Oh, wait, it's Mrs. Santa Claus. Oh, wow, we didn't realize that at first, but now we see it's you because it's you." And she immediately abandons the plan. She's like, "Oh, well, I guess that's that then."
Yep. Oh, these people who I work with every day recognize who I am with my incomplete disguise. So the plan's a bust. Time for something else.
The idea of and especially considering this movie only has 15 minutes, but it shows us how much they have to stretch, that they literally wasted a whole song on a plan that literally, I don't even think a minute later, is immediately scuppered and abandoned by the person who sung the song.
Yeah, and this is a really good example because this song has a message which then could be further extrapolated into further ideas of there is a call to action that you can have in a Christmas narrative about forms of charity that you can do to execute to, so you can contribute to making the world a better place. Anyone can be Santa Claus. Yeah. But it's ignored immediately. It's just, "Oh, well, woman can't actually do that. Never mind. We've got more important things to do."
Yeah, there's a universal message that could be done there with charity, and also perhaps a feminist one where the idea of is mostly male-dominated, especially because it's mostly just Santa, the male patriarch of the North Pole.
Yeah, he's a bit less obnoxious white meat patriarch in this one. He's far more possibly drunk Mickey Rooney.
Yeah, and it could have been interesting to see this, a female character's taking a bit more of a stronger role in a Christmas story, but unfortunately, no, she is immediately discarded, or at least the idea of her being the major player at Christmas time is discarded. She immediately does have a little bit more to do in the movie, but
she becomes a taxi driver, essentially, to move people from scene to scene.
Yeah. But for this movie, that's kind of a major role, because no one else has much of one.
Because nothing happens in this movie.
Yeah. So actually, the process of moving around is almost as much action as you get in this movie.
The other pin that we need to unpin is, of course, well, we don't believe in Santa Claus. Also, the papers said that Santa Claus is retired. Is obviously this is a thing that you could ding and say, "Whoa, we've got a plot hole here. like, this is actually something which could be described as a plot hole where the internal narrative has been broken. As we are trying to make discussions on faith with a demonstrably factual person who has regular contact with news media. And so from there, it's, well, what ideas are you trying to discuss? And this is ultimately where a lot of the ideas we're pulling out is a product of the normative values espoused by the film rather than explicit ideas that the text wants to tell you, because the text doesn't know what it's saying.
Yeah, it's one of those things where on the surface level you can laugh at it as a plot hole, and it's just like, this doesn't make any sense at all. I think it also, because if the movie was trying to be clever with it, it could have been like, well, we believe that Santa Claus exists, we just don't believe in his cause. We don't think that he actually does make us happier in our lives. We don't believe in that jolliness. We don't believe in the holidays anymore. It could even just be
Darker, more cynical age.
Or maybe they've become greedy. You could even make an even more interesting Christmas movie where the fact that, because even maybe Santa Claus himself has also participated in this idea of he gives gifts, that's how he makes people jolly. And so people have become so used to like getting presents every year that they've kind of forgotten the more deeper values of Christmas. And so they've kind of they're taking him for granted. He's just like...
You want a film which covers that idea quite well? The Grinch 2000. Like, that is one of the things that film's attempt at adapting a Dr. Seuss picture book does to extrapolate and expand the narrative, is that it establishes the Who's of Whoville being absolute assholes. And it's only when everything which they thought was so important has been stolen from them that they actually gain a greater understanding of who they are and what actually matters. And so they are as much, if anything, the Mayor of Whoville is the villain of the Jim Carrey The Grinch film, not the Grinch. And that's pretty sweet. We're not going to do any Grinch content this year. He's too busy hijacking Hyundai's Twitter account. And I think Silver Gunner is also under the purview of the Grinch at the moment.
Definitely want to shout out Silver Gunner. Fantastic channel. Only the highest quality of rips. You should definitely give that a go. But yeah, there's a better message there to be done, a better story to be told. It's a shame the movie doesn't really... Like, I have to work really hard to get to there just from this movie. And I think it shows that it's kind of messed up, both in terms of the logic, its internal logic, but also just any kind of message that it's trying to tell is also just broken as well.
And so we move from there to Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. My first question with this film is, how do you feel about the title Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas? Well, after we were watching the credits.
I would question whether it really needs to have Tim Burton's name in front of it. Like, I never quite... Maybe this is just me not having the correct knowledge of where titles come. Like, why does some movies need to have...
Okay, I'll tell you why.
Right.
Branding.
Right.
It is entirely because Tim Burton had already established a reputation of being the German expressionism for the modern age auteur. And so, having his name, he was heavily involved in the scripting process, but did not specifically write the screenplay or anything. It's more just this general role while also managing the funds for the film, popping in, giving feedback and so on. But there's quite a very large number of people who worked on this film that really, really deserve the credit. I feel a bit torn always with this film, and that's why I've decided to go with something that would give the film a more positive framing in the end, rather than a negative one. So I guess I'll get my big negative out of the way with this film, which is, this is a film, much like every Tim Burton directed film, where it's about celebrating and returning to a status quo. That the film begins with Jack the Pumpkin King unsatisfied with the role that he was born with and must always do. And in the process of experimenting and exploring other ideas, his conclusion is he must do the exact same thing he has always done. And this is something that pops up time and time again in Tim Burton films, is there's very much this fear of digging into things too deeply, and this genuine, unabashed love for things like suburbia. You look at the way that a lot of, say, the suburbia is shot in something like Edward Scissorhands. And it would be very easy to read as highlighting how terrifying this uniformity is. But to Tim Burton, it was comforting. And it was actually something he liked. And so, like, that is a film about this weirdo being brought into the wider world. And they all love him because suburbia is great and is wonderful. And that seeps through everything that he touches. To the point where I feel like Tim Burton's work is something that people who got into, you get into it as a teenager where you haven't quite learned how to really dissect and deconstruct and engage with media. And so the surface level aesthetics of outcasts and weirdos and rebellion resonate with you. But then if you don't really think about it, you either learn to, if there are things in there which you actually really like, then you'll move on from Tim Burton and actually uncover the things that actually believe those sorts of ideas that these aesthetics are conveying, or you wind up getting pulled into that love of hegemony that is ultimately deeper in the texts.
Yeah, you see that with how these two worlds, there's basically two worlds in this movie. There's the Christmas town and there's, actually, is there a name for the Halloween?
Halloween.
Just Halloween, yeah.
This is Halloween.
This is Halloween, yeah. Halloween and Christmas town, in the fact that they are so firmly in one direction or the other. There is nothing in between. There's no nuance in Halloween. There's no nuance in...
These are all purely essentialist qualities for essentially animistic presentations of American holidays.
And that eventually they, despite Jack Skellington's attempts to bring a bit of Christmas into Halloween, in some ways, with the climax of the film, it almost kind of suggests that actually, no, these two worlds can't collide as
fundamentally incompatible.
Yeah, which is really funny because probably my favorite episode of this season's Doctor Who features a little bit of that. I won't go into that too much because not everyone has seen that whole season yet, and I won't. But it really reminded me of that a lot. This idea of two worlds that are completely incompatible with each other and how sad that is. While with this movie, it's somewhat celebrated, or at least accepted.
Yeah, it's great. You should know your place and you should stick with it, and also you should hook up with this girl.
Yeah, it's almost like this kind of segregation, this idea of like there can be
which is at the core of White Flight, and again tying into the love of suburbia that is common in Tim Burton's work.
I think probably the weirdest thing with that is just that you would consider that kind of a story, or this kind of a story, would then be from the perspective of the happier place rather than the darker place. So, like, you'd think that you would a story like this would normally be like set in, say, Christmas Town, and the darkness kind of invades it a little bit, or maybe one of the heroes who's a bit bored about his life brings in a bit of the darkness into the happier place. But it's the opposite here, which is interesting.
Yeah, and that's going to lead to what is really great about this film. And I guess we should actually summarize the plot of this film, but I guess I'll just say one of the really great things about this film, and to show it for the younger people, is that it's an excellent film for introducing the concept of cultural appropriation. And that's the really positive way to look at Jack Skellington's journey here, where he has seen a thing. He's just walked into a culture without any grounding as to context, and he sees things and he sees symbols and he wants them, so he takes them without any thought as to the impact this will have on people's lives. And of course, cultural appropriation is a politically neutral term. It is simply describing a process that occurs and has occurred in pretty much every culture, as the legacy of colonialism has impacted every culture on the planet. And this is an example of how, like, there's interesting things that can happen here, and this is a way to introduce to kids, like, yeah, like, if you see stuff and you want to, like, you really need to understand it if you're gonna really get into it.
And you see that in the most basic, as you say, one of the reasons why it's so good for younger children is that it's introduced in the most basic of ways. So they might not, I doubt any many kids would be coming out of the movie saying, I know what cultural appropriation is, but just those little seeds of ideas might be implanted a little bit.
Yeah, and that's the value. That is essentially the value of film as far as cultural manipulation, is that it's not very good at changing your mind. It's not even very good at presenting arguments to you, but film is very, very good at making you feel warm and fuzzy about certain things and uncomfortable about other things. I guess we should actually just summarize the plot of The Nightmare Before Christmas now.
Yeah, I probably should. Is there a chance that you could do it though? Because it was a bit wacky and
Yeah. As always with a visually dense musical, the first time you see it, you're trying to process, especially if you're not really into musicals and you're not used to actually really paying attention and listening to the lyrics, where a large amount of exposition is occurring. So there is a series of spiritual realms which embody the American versions of various holidays. So there's obviously there's a Halloween town, there's a Christmas town, an Easter town, a Thanksgiving town, and a St. Patrick's Day town. That pops up in a couple of shots. And inside the town of Halloween, another Halloween has successfully come to a close where all the denizens of town have done their best to spook people, because that's what Halloween is, I guess.
Yeah, sorry, just to jump in, like, I never quite understood that because, and this is nothing really, this is just a slight logic question, really. It's like, if they are all denizens of Halloween and they're all the same, who are they spooking? I mean, they're all monsters who...
I would assume that they go out into the world and spook people.
Oh, okay, alright, fair enough, yeah.
Because, okay. I mean, otherwise you'd be saying, like, why does Christmas Town go? Does it just do Christmas in its own town the whole time? But
yeah, that was my question.
But you do see Santa Claus explicitly flying around giving out the presents at the end of the film.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay.
So, yes. So they've just had another Halloween, and the king of Halloween Town, Jack Skellington, the Pumpkin King, is feeling a serious case of ennui. He's bored of Halloween. For the entirety of his existence, he has planned and executed Halloween celebrations. So he goes for a walk through a forest, and he finds his way to the doors that lead to the various festive realms, and from there he discovers Christmas, and he thinks, this is amazing. It's sparkly and bright. There's these stockings and these things called presents, and I think you give them to people. And there's this food and all this stuff, and this seems really cool. So he tries to get the town to prepare for Christmas, but they cannot comprehend this concept at all. Scaring is what we do, so what is giving thing? So with this frustration in mind, he then conducts a series of attempts to academically study. This is a classic example of, and it's certainly something that I always worry about when I talk about things that aren't from my upbringing, where it's like, okay, do I actually understand the thing I'm talking about, or am I just giving this textbook version, which was in turn written by a person who didn't really participate in a culture? And so that's what he does. He reads the literature on Christmas. So he reads A Christmas Carol, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, etc. He then decides to read The Scientific Method to try and logically perceive and grok what the concept of Christmas is. From there, he decides that, so if I cannot get Christmas into Halloween, then I shall just use the manpower we have to become Christmas, and I shall be Santa Claus. So he assigns some children to kidnap Santa Claus to get him out of the way, so that way Jack can do his own Christmas. He attempts to fly around town giving out presents to all the boys and girls, but of course, everyone in the town has been using their own standards and interpretations of the imagery of Christmas. So what they think is quite nice gifts terrifies and horrifies everyone around. It just turns out some kids, and I'm going to emphasize here, some kids. There are kids who would absolutely love to receive like a severed, shrunken head, or like a duck that might kill you. That is absolutely a thing some kids would want. I mean, Gooey Louie was a popular board game when I was a child. And that's about literally picking a guy's nose. And then, in the process of giving these horrifying gifts, it spooks a lot of people. And so the American military sets up anti-aircraft guns and shoots Jack down. And as he has hit his lowest point, he realizes that, no, this Christmas idea was terrible. Halloween is what I am. It is what I'm made for. It is what I do. I'm going to go back to just doing Halloween. Then it turns out that the children who kidnapped Santa Claus then gave Santa Claus over to the boogeyman. And whereas Jack Skellington is... And they're all the denizens of Halloween Town. They like the macabre, but they intend it to be an uplifting thing. Like, go back to my Halloween episodes where I talked about how, like, there's various traditions. There's macabre traditions which are about understanding and honouring the dead and looking at your history. And there's also traditions about, like, that sense of the otherness can be a safe place for minorities. So, like, that's absolutely something which Halloween Town is leaning into. However, the boogeyman is just a very, very bad dude who's going to torture and murder both the potential love interest for Jack Skellington, who's tried to rescue Santa Claus, and possibly murder Santa Claus himself. So Jack Skellington outwits and defeats Boogie Woogie in the span of about 80 seconds. And then he decides that, hey, I've got to be the king of Halloween, and also I like this chick. And so they kiss and the movie ends.
Just as with the actual movie itself, like, your description of it is, like, going really well up until that moment when he's shot down, and then we've already talked about, like, the reasons why it's not quite working because of that.
Well, we did that before we taped, but yeah, this film has an incredibly abrupt third act.
Sorry, obviously with the abruptness, but also with how the message kind of gets distorted, where, like, the way he decides that he is Halloween, he belongs in Halloween, and he should just do that instead of trying to maybe be a bit more like that's, yeah. And yeah, as well as that, it is just so abrupt in that last quarter of an hour, which is, I don't know, like, I felt like the movie was really doing a fantastic job until it gets to that hour mark. And then it just starts to fail both in terms of that abruptness and in terms of, like, the message that it's telling. And I think that's a real shame.
How do you feel about the boogeyman in this film?
Well, he's just such a nothing character, really. Like, he's just the movie. For a while, it looks like it might be clever enough not to need a villain because its main character is causing enough problems by themselves. So you could have the problem being that the villain could almost be like cultural differences between two very different towns, and just trying to navigate between them. But instead, it needs apparently to have its action conclusion. And so the boogeyman is just kind of there to be that villain, to have
he's almost a distraction from the majority of the film. The most villainous character is the mad scientist who made Sally the love interest for Jack Skellington, where almost every scene Sally has is about struggling with the ownership that this man professes to have over her. But then ultimately is just ignored. She just kind of slips out and he makes a clone of his own, so neither of them will be virgins. And that just gets sidestepped in favor of the boogeyman. Now, I have some issues with the boogeyman. The boogeyman is quite problematic and also leads into, again, where I was talking about, like, there's a certain strand of conservatism to Burton's work, and how essentially some of the nastiest agents of true villainy in this film are children. Like, no, it is the children who are wrong is totally an idea floating in this film. And the other thing is, the boogeyman is played by a black man, and his aesthetics are voodoo and gambling, specifically dice. Those are both early cartoon shorthand for those pesky black people, and have very strong racist connotations. And so, this is a case where this might be much like how there was some discourse around Cuphead when it launched, where it was using a bunch of the semiotics from that era without really thinking about the fact that there was the racist component to them. And while Cuphead does manage to have a narrative that does explicitly distance itself from those concepts, by using the same art direction and imagery, it's still pulling into and leaning into that history. And much like here, I'm not sure if it was an intentional thing or not, but I mean, authorial intent doesn't particularly matter here. When I'm seeing that these days, I always have this sense of, ooh, I'm not a fan of, like, the most black character in this film being explicitly evil and corrupting children.
Especially when it's a character that had no reason to be in the movie in the first place. So it's not even, you can't even say that that the character was entertaining or was a meaningful part of the film, and it doesn't really it's not really an excuse, but at least you can say, well, they used those elements well, and it's a shame that they also are connotated with this. Instead of it's just a boring character that has no reason to be there, and it also is kind of icky and is just not, and makes you feel uncomfortable if you understand those connotations between yeah.
But if you want a more entertaining version of the Boogeyman, you know what you can do? You can check out The Nightmare Before Christmas, Oogie Boogie's Revenge. The PlayStation 2, I think, and definitely original Xbox game developed by Capcom, with a chunk of the Devil May Cry development team, and made using one of the Devil May Cry engines. That's right, there is a character action game of The Nightmare Before Christmas with a rhythm game final boss fight using all new verses to the Boogeyman song.
I knew there was a character action game of this movie before I saw it, but I'm even more surprised about it now, considering that, as we were talking about, the more interesting conflicts in this movie are about cultural appropriation, the idea of trying to expand out and to grow as a person. So, like, trying to, in this case, it's literally just Jack Skellington trying to bring something different into his life.
Yeah,
it's more
and
jolliness.
the awkwardly explored feminist themes as well.
Yeah, and that doesn't lend itself to character action at all. So it is interesting to me that that was the video game that they went with.
Yeah, there's this very strange relationship that Capcom and Disney had for a long time. As when Capcom still had all its animators, the company had throughout the 80s and 90s an incredible amount, particularly in the mid-90s, an incredible amount of classically trained animators. So you look at games like Vampire Savior and Street Fighter 3, and the technical quality of the animation in those games is incredible. And even you go back to like the NES and the SNES era, and there's this very clear love of Disney, and they frequently try to negotiate to get the rights to do Disney IPs in games just because they liked them so much. And that's why you get weird things like the sort of 2D Zelda purely puzzle game Goof Troop, or like the NES DuckTales game with the really good Moon song.
Sounds like a fascinating relationship to explore. Capcom and Disney, they're not the people that I would expect.
Yeah, it's one of those curious ones. Then, of course, Kingdom Hearts is then an even crazier relationship.
And it's topical with the third Kingdom Hearts coming out pretty soon.
Yeah, coming out within the next 2 years. It can always get delayed again. You got any other thoughts on The Nightmare Before Christmas? I've gotten my main thrusts out of the way here.
I guess it probably should just be said that it is a very fun-looking movie.
Oh yeah, it's gorgeous.
I love the character design of Jack Skellington in particular. I just love how long-limbed he is, and a lot of scenes with him just look fantastic. The way he's especially when he's being Santa Claus, or he's trying to be Santa Claus, and just the way he's scuttling around the houses and getting down the chimneys. It's he's this evil spider that thinks he's jolly. Oh
yeah, I should mention here that there are some moments that are really cool in the Rankin Bass things we saw. You see birds in flight, which in stop motion, if you're not familiar with what stop motion means, and you're this far into the episode, you basically shoot everything that's in the shot. You essentially take 24 photos per second, and you have to pose everything that's in the image 24 times to get 1 second's worth of footage. So it is a very tedious but also quite visually stunning style when you do it well. And there's some interesting moments where you get little corner cuts where they can actually just use a full continuous shoot for moments. Like during the big snowstorm in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, there's some models having sand thrown on them. And that looks quite fun in a very Thunderbirdsy way. But there's a couple of moments in Rudolph and a bunch more, particularly the Snow Miser spinning, where there's motion blur because they've actually just shot a bit of film. And that's pretty cool. It's fun to look at, but that has nothing on the sheer quality and ambition and technical skill going on in the stop motion of The Nightmare Before Christmas. There are sequences where it's stop motion, so again, 24 frames per second, you have to repose everything, and at the same time that's happening, there is dynamism in the camera's motion. So the camera is swinging or zooming in and bouncing around while everything has had to be reposed every frame for every shot, and they've managed to perfectly have the camera positioned. That stuff is brilliant.
It's technically brilliant, and maybe that's why it is cut short. Maybe just because
that's
the
absolutely
effort.
why it's a short film, because like this is expensive and tedious to do.
And it's a shame, actually, in that case. Like, I wonder whether I would have rathered a different method of filming that would have allowed more interesting themes and stories to be told with it, or whether just the visual feast that the movie is in motion is essentially its finest quality, and you can maybe forgive the less savory aspects of it because of that.
Well, you know, there is a line in Tim Burton's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which has been highlighted in an excellent video by one Maggie May Fish of sometimes candy doesn't have to say anything. Sometimes candy is just candy. Which is very much the mission statement of Tim Burton's films, and you can totally take The Nightmare Before Christmas in that way. But I think in unpacking it a bit more, you really gain a greater insight into the strengths and the flaws of humanity.
I thought you were going to say Tim Burton, but then you spread that out. You expanded.
Well, I mean, that was the idea. We've been trying to expand on Christmas as having universalist themes, and there you go, everyone sucks. Thanks for listening. Should I just hit stop now?
Wow. Yeah, okay. We're all terrible. Merry Christmas.